Driving alone at night always carried an air of unease, but tonight felt different. The darkness wasn't just an absence of light, it felt alive, pressing against the car like a tangible force. Each mile stretched longer than the last, and with every passing moment, the solitude weighed heavier. This wasn't the kind of night for stories about unsolved disappearances or sinister roadside encounters. Yet the thoughts crept in, unwelcome but persistent. The air outside seemed unnaturally still. No wind stirred the leaves, no stars broke through the thick blanket of clouds above. The road ahead twisted endlessly into the abyss, flanked by towering silhouettes of trees. It was the kind of silence that didn't just surround you, it crept into your mind, whispering doubts, feeding your imagination. Every shadow felt like a figure, every creak of the car like a warning. Driving felt automatic, like a ritual performed under a spell of fatigue. The mind wandered to fleeting memories, mundane thoughts, and then sharply back to the present as an inexplicable chill ran down the spine. Something wasn't right, though there was no reason to think so. It was just a lonely road on a lonely night, yet the sensation of being watched was impossible to ignore. Glances into the rearview mirror became more frequent, though nothing appeared. The paranoia grew, subtle but insistent. Was that faint glow in the distance another car, or was it something else entirely? Rationality argued it was nothing. The primal instinct, however, said otherwise. And then the lights came, a sudden burst of red and blue, stark against the pitch-black surroundings, accompanied by the shrill cry of a siren. It was a noise that demanded attention, yet it sent a jolt of dread through the chest. Relief should have followed. Help was near, an authority figure to break the solitude. But instead, unease blossomed into fear. Something about those lights, the timing, the isolated road, it didn't feel like rescue. It felt like a trap. There was no one else for miles. The rural highways of Missouri can stretch endlessly, with dense woods flanking either side, creating an eerie tunnel-like effect. It was on one such desolate road that Mark Peterson found himself on a cool autumn evening. Mark, a traveling salesman, was driving back home after a week-long trip across the Midwest. His sedan hummed softly as it ate up the miles, its headlights cutting through the enveloping darkness. The only sound accompanying him was the low murmur of his favorite true crime podcast. As the narrator detailed a chilling case of a serial killer who had preyed on unsuspecting drivers in remote areas, Mark felt a shiver creep up his spine. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It was just past 11 p.m. Suddenly, the red and blue lights of a police car flared to life behind him. The shrill whoop of a siren cut through the still night, startling Mark. He glanced in his rearview mirror and saw the unmistakable silhouette of a police cruiser. Instinctively, he slowed down and pulled over to the shoulder, his tires crunching on the gravel. Mark rolled down his window as the officer approached. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a uniform that seemed authentic at first glance. His face was obscured by the brim of his hat and the harsh glare of the police cruiser's spotlight behind him. "Evening, sir," the officer said in a low, almost monotonous voice. "License and registration, please." Mark nodded and fumbled in his glove compartment for his papers, his movements slightly shaky. As he handed them over, he noticed something peculiar. The badge on the officer's chest didn't glint in the light as it should have. It looked dull, almost plastic-like. "Was I speeding, officer?" Mark asked, trying to keep his tone polite. "No," the man replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "Routine stop. There's been some trouble in the area. Just need to ask you a few questions." Mark's unease grew. Routine stops weren't common, especially not on roads as isolated as this one. "Sure," he replied hesitantly. The officer leaned down, his face now partially visible. Mark felt a pang of discomfort. The man's eyes seemed off, glassy and hollow, as if he were staring right through him. "Where are you headed?" the officer asked. "Home," Mark replied quickly. "Kansas City." "Been drinking tonight?" the officer asked. "No, sir," Mark answered. The officer straightened up and stepped back toward his cruiser. "Wait here." Mark watched him retreat to the patrol car, a strange tension knotting in his stomach. He glanced at his side mirror, but the cruiser's lights obscured his view. Minutes ticked by, and Mark's anxiety mounted. He reached for his phone, thinking about calling anyone, but realized there was no signal. Typical of these rural backroads. When the officer returned, he wasn't alone. Another man, also in uniform, flanked him. This second figure was lankier, his uniform looking oddly mismatched and ill-fitting. The two men stood on either side of Mark's car, their presence oppressive. "We're going to need you to step out of the vehicle," the first officer said. "Why?" Mark asked, his voice trembling now. "Is there a problem with my paperwork?" "Step out of the vehicle," the officer repeated, his tone firmer. Reluctantly, Mark obeyed. The moment his feet hit the ground, he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool night air. The second officer opened Mark's trunk without asking for permission and began rummaging through his belongings. "Hey, you can't do that without a warrant," Mark protested, his voice cracking. The first officer stepped closer, his towering figure casting a long shadow over Mark. "Sir, calm down," he said, though there was nothing calming about his demeanor. "We're just doing our job." Mark's pulse raced. Something was very wrong. These men didn't behave like real cops. Before he could say anything else, the second officer pulled something from the trunk, a bottle of whiskey Mark hadn't touched in weeks. "Looks like you've been drinking," the man sneered, holding the bottle up. "That's not open," Mark stammered. "You can't pin that on me." The first officer ignored him, grabbing Mark by the arm with a grip that felt almost inhumanly strong. "You're coming with us," he said, dragging him toward the patrol car. Panic surged through Mark as he realized that the patrol car wasn't a real police vehicle. Up close, it looked like an old sedan painted to resemble a cruiser. The decals were peeling, and the lights seemed hastily rigged. "Let me go," Mark shouted, struggling against the officer's grip. But the man's strength was overwhelming. He shoved Mark into the backseat and slammed the door. The interior reeked of mildew and something metallic blood, Mark realized with a jolt of terror. The windows were barred, and the locks didn't budge. The car sped off, and Mark's heart pounded as he saw the dark woods swallowing the road ahead. He yelled for help, banging on the windows, but the men in the front ignored him. The first officer, who was driving, turned the radio on. Static crackled before a haunting, guttural voice emerged, speaking in a language Mark couldn't recognize. The car veered off the main road onto a dirt path, the trees pressing in closer. Mark's mind raced. He had to escape. Summoning his courage, he kicked at the door repeatedly, the metal groaning under his efforts. "Quit that," the second officer barked, turning to glare at him. For a moment, Mark caught a glimpse of the man's face in the dim light. His skin was unnaturally pale, almost translucent, and his teeth were jagged, yellowed, and far too numerous. Mark froze, his breath hitching. "What are you?" he whispered, more to himself than to them. The officer grinned, his inhuman teeth glinting. "Oh, we're just here to enforce the law," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. The car came to an abrupt stop in a small clearing. The men dragged Mark out, ignoring his desperate pleas for mercy. In the center of the clearing was an old, rusted cage, its bars twisted and gnarled as if molded by some unnatural force. "You're not the first officer said, his voice now distorted and guttural. "And you won't be the last." Mark screamed as they shoved him into the cage, slamming the door shut. The last thing he saw before they vanished into the woods was their forms shifting, becoming grotesque and monstrous, their uniforms melting away to reveal clawed limbs and gaping maws. The cage rattled, and Mark turned to see dozens of eyes staring at him from the darkness, glowing faintly. The woods came alive with the sound of low, guttural growls, and Mark realized he wasn't alone. Whatever these creatures were, they had been feeding for a long time. And now he was next. The darkness swallowed the road once more, leaving behind only questions and a lingering unease. Encounters like these blur the line between reality and nightmare, a chilling reminder that not everything on the open road is what it seems. Was it all just an overactive imagination, or was there something truly sinister lurking in the shadows? The answers may never come, but one thing is certain. Some stories are best left untold, their mysteries locked away in the stillness of the night. Mark's story isn't just a frightening encounter, It's a harsh lesson in trust, instinct, and survival. In a world where danger often wears a convincing disguise, hesitation can be deadly. Not every uniform guarantees safety, and not every flashing light means help is on the way. We're taught to be polite, to comply, to ignore the gut feeling that tells us something is wrong. But Mark's fate reminds us that instinct is our most primal, most powerful alarm. And sometimes, it's all we have. Evil doesn't always look monstrous. Sometimes, it looks official. It asks routine questions, it speaks calmly. But behind the mask, it waits for the moment you let your guard down. Out there, on the open road or in quiet corners of the world, awareness can be the thin line between life and disappearance. So trust your fear, listen to your intuition, and never surrender your sense of control too easily. Your life may one day depend on it. If you found yourself gripping your seat through this chilling tale, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in a situation like this? And remember, the road isn't always as empty as it seems. Stay vigilant, stay safe, and join us next time for another unforgettable encounter.